welcome to all those who are joining in for the third PIM monthly montage. I'm Channa De Silva, senior lecturer from the faculty at PIM. And under the visionary leadership and guidance of our director, Professor Ajantha Dharmasiri, we have been conducting this monthly montage as a very special value addition to our students and also the Sri Lankan corporate entities. Learning is a two-way thing, and at PIM, we believe that while we have our alumni and also the faculty with a very updated knowledge on what's happening in the industry, we also strongly believe in partnering with you, our learning partners, as well as the Sri Lankan community, and engaging in thought and knowledge sharing exercise on a frequent manner. And the PIM monthly montage is yet another forum like that, where on a monthly basis, we bring together the academic excellence of the PIM faculty members together with the industry expertise of the PIM alumni members, and we make sure it becomes a scintillating discussion through which you will gain valuable insights on some of the most timely economic and business related topics. And today, our focus will be on the digital economy. This digital economy, one might say, is one of the most exciting terms of the new normal. And at the same time, some would rightly argue it's quite a cliche and a hackneyed term where we tend to be using it for everything. So that's why Professor Ajantha Dharmasiri, the visionary director of PIM, decided it was quite suitable to bring out this topic to clear out some of the issues, some of the murky waters which people might be a little not so sure of, and make sure that you understand where exactly is Sri Lanka in a digital economy and what do you need to know in order to implement and implement programs in your enterprise and also be a valuable player in the Sri Lankan digital economy. And with that, I would like to now hand over the session for moderation to our moderator of the last two programs as well. And despite a very busy schedule, who has taken time to join us and carry out his moderation activities today, Professor Ajantha Dharmasiri. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Tanidu. Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum. A very good evening to each and every one of you. I'm so glad that we are running into the third episode of PIM Monthly Montage. Being the nation's management mentor and being the pioneer of MBA education, and we thought it is opportune for us to get into the digital platform in a more impactful manner, and then to outreach to our like-minded participants, and basically to as a part of our grooming of future leaders, to do something on a monthly basis. So we call it online discussion series. So welcome to the third of its kind. As my colleague, Mr. Tharudu Amarasekara, I should appreciate his pioneering contribution as the initiator of this whole concept of monthly montage. As he said, we are talking about something savvy, something significant, and something strategically required by a country like Sri Lanka. So let me thank Mr. Channa De Silva, another prestigious product of PIM, who is with us, and then my colleague Prabhash, who is the host, and of course Tharindu. So together we would invite all of you to join us for an intellectually insightful interaction for the next 1 hour. And I must tell you, it reminds me of what Thomas Friedman of New York Times fame said some time ago. He said, as much as there are rich countries and poor countries, as much as there are big countries and small countries, as much as there are developed countries and developing countries, there are fast countries and slow countries. So fast countries will eat slow countries. So that's where the digitalization comes into the scene. Your progress is not measured only by GDP, but also by gigabytes per second. That's why they say for the next 5 years, the world would experience 150 zettabytes of data. We are in a data-driven world. We are in a data-immersed world. So zettabyte, I was told, is 1 zettabyte is equal to trillion gigabytes. So from the metric terms, kilo, mega, giga, tera, and so on. So it's a huge amount of data. We are in a data thirsty world. And I think I must tell you, I must confess that I'm not an expert. I'm only an experiencer of the richness of digitalization. I'm one who is reaping the harvest of digitalization. So we have two experts to share with us the reality or myth. So the topic is very opportune, digital economy in Sri Lanka. In fact, COVID-19 that we are all experiencing, the planetary pandemic, we are all combating COVID-19, and it is taking ups and downs, and the second wave is appearing to be more devastating than we initially thought. At the same time, the ray of hope is coming through the vaccine, and then a lot of mitigatory measures, and the world is demonstrating resilience towards a revival. So in such a context, what is the role digital economy would play in Sri Lanka? So again, to be brilliant on basis, we should know the nature and features of what a digital economy is all about. So my first question to both panelists, starting with Mr. Channa De Silva, and I think he needs no introduction. He's the CEO of Lanka Clear. He was recently, he was much in limelight with media when they launched the Lanka card. As opposed to Visa and MasterCard, there's now Lanka card, which reduces the dollar payment to overseas parties, and for us to have our own way of transactions using a card of Sri Lankan origin. So Lanka card, and he's also working with other initiatives like Lanka Signature and so on. So I think we can hear from him about those wonderful initiatives, and then basically technology adoption. And also, of course, Tarindu needs no introduction. He's an upcoming emerging resource person on digitalization and finance and many other areas. So I think while they are initial thought sharing, they will tell us what they do and what makes them to be attracted to this fascinating area. So my first question is starting with Channa, then to Tarindu, is what digital economy is all about in relation to Sri Lanka. Give us an introduction, the nature and features of digital economy in Sri Lankan context. Over to Channa.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, it's an interesting topic. That is something that I grapple with day in and day out. In a nutshell, what a digital economy is, it's more or less worldwide economic activities, or in transactions as well as professional interactions with related to economic activities that are facilitated by information technology. I mean, primarily it would be internet, but not necessarily 100%. Any electronic transaction, electronic medium that facilitate an economic activity can be termed as part and parcel of digital economy. So I think the question here is, I think digital economy is a buzzword around the world, and how it relates to Sri Lanka and what it means for Sri Lanka, and whether it will be a reality or a myth. I think if you look at the worldwide economic activities, it's been there for a very long time. I mean, the advent of internet and and then using it initially for academic activities, and then the businesses got into it, especially with the internet boom, starting somewhere late 1990s to early 2000s, and when the businesses got in. So I think that is where, with the World Wide Web coming in, which actually facilitated most of the commercial transactions. I think that is when the real businesses started getting in, and it really the digital economy piece was coined, especially because of the advent of internet. But I think if you really look at from economic perspective, it's not just a electronic or payment or financial transaction. It is the entire value chain of actions or activities that are related to for a business to function or a government to function, or even a citizen to function. So it's a collection of larger activities that facilitate different economic activities. So one of the key functions of facilitators of a digital economy is obviously the digitization of the financial sector ecosystem, which is banks and finance companies and the related areas, digitizing that piece. So that is one key segment. But in addition, there are other areas of digitization that has to go in. For example, digital government. I mean, how citizens interact with government. So that is also part of the whole digital economy, because obviously for a financial transaction to conclude, especially if you look at cross-border, cross-countries transactions, there are a lot of government agents and institutions that need to get involved in the entire supply chain. And also from a citizen-centric piece, the citizens need to connect with the government, with the businesses to get something done. Multiple areas of activities. And also in addition, from a business perspective, I think it has gone much wider. If you look at, I think, Professor's area of HR, the technology is playing a key role. So those are all part of a digital economy. So any technology that is being used to facilitate a part and parcel of the entire value chain of the economy is part and parcel of a digital economy. But I think my interest area in this space is especially what we as part of we are actually governed and mandated by central banks. So Lanka Clear is sort of, there's only one Lanka Clear in Sri Lanka, which is sort of facilitating all interconnections between banks, or we call it interbank payments, starting from clearing of checks between banks to sending bulk payments across banks from account to account. That facilitate a whole heap of economic activities, from paying salaries to employees to many other activities that are done on a bulk basis, simultaneously sending multiple transactions to what we call fast payments, which is real-time payments that are originating either through internet-based mobile internet banking type of applications to mobile payments. There's a plethora of applications that are carrying out applications of towards payments. And also, I think Professor touched on card-based payments, which is basically transactions carried out using electronic cards and point-of-sale terminals. And also, in addition, so this is actually part of the payment ecosystem. But in addition, for a transaction to take place, you also need a set of documentation. For example, invoice needs to be raised, a purchase order needs to be raised. So there are, larger number of different transactions, not necessarily just a payment. To facilitate a payment, there's a set of paperwork, if you will, previously, but all of them now are digitized, and that is where a digital signature come in now, especially during COVID, that people could not exchange papers, put signatures to documents. So the electronic signatures and all those become part of the whole economy. And in terms of Sri Lanka, I think we will discuss in detail. We have been having all these tools in place for facilitating a digital economy. But I think the fundamental problem throughout the years has been the adoption of those. Initially among the businesses, primarily in the SME sector, which is contributing, I think more than 50% of the economic activities are through SMEs. Most of their activities are still manual and paper-based and cash-based, if you will, and also getting citizens involved, the consumers, to actually get engaged in electronic activities, which has been traditionally an issue. But I think even though COVID brought a lot of bad aspects into the economy, I think one of the best aspects that it brought was positive aspects that it brought was it pushed people towards digital because they had no choice. So I think from a Sri Lanka perspective, I think, I mean, if I touch on digital signatures, we have been having digital signatures since 2009. And actually these digital signatures are acceptable in a court of law through Electronic Transactions Act. So all these tools, the legislation, the Payments and Systems and Settlements Act, so the legislations have been in place. But I think the fundamental problem has been the usage of these different tools which are put out by banks, finance companies, and different service providers. There was sort of, I would say, there was no compelling reason or compelling push for people to use prior to actually COVID. So I think it has sort of given everybody a boost in joining. So I think a whole digital economic activities are beginning to take place. So we will discuss about this more in detail as we go on. Over to you, Tarindu. Professor.
Thank you very much, Channa, for that very enlightening start and sharing those valuable insights. Being someone who is in the forefront of the industry, it's always quite refreshing to hear from you. Now, if you look at this term, digital economy, let's first understand, the meaning of economy. I think that's a definition which many of us have heard at some point of time with regard to our, when we are studying for an MBA, or maybe when we are studying for a degree or some kind of qualification. Now, we all know an economy basically means the system by which goods and services are produced, distributed, and consumed. So what do we mean by the term a digital economy? Friends, a digital economy would essentially be the extent to which digital technology is a part of these economic activities of a country. Now, normally, whenever there is some trend, for example, we've heard of things like knowledge economy, etc. These trends actually are first adopted to a large extent by the developed world. That's why we see, even when it comes to the knowledge economy, we saw a lot of knowledge being centered around US and Europe. And then it slowly trickles down to the developing countries. But in the case of digital technologies have actually enabled so many developing, less developed economies to leapfrog. That means to go over and above multiple times where they were and come to the front and be on par with the developed world. We'll take an example. I mean, if you look at banking, there are so many countries like, for example, Nigeria or Kenya, where their banking infrastructure was nowhere compared to the developed economies, but digital technologies like simple mobile apps, SMS alerts, these kind of very simple digital technologies allowed the people in those countries to really enjoy the convenience of that particular service. Because end of the day, by bringing in any technology, the aim is to make sure that those services or those goods are made available in a much more convenient manner to their day-to-day life. It's important to note that digital economy is not just about trying to have the latest technology, robotics, available in one company of the country. That is not digital economics. That is what you call digital showing off, which unfortunately what digital economics is considered in a lot of countries, and I'm sorry to say even in Sri Lanka. You can talk about one company having developed a robot, but the question should be, how fast is it getting adopted in the rest of the country? For example, we all saw about this Atlas company making a robot who is capable of going and delivering medical services and all that in some of the institutions. Fine, we all clapped. We were all very happy about it. We all shared on Facebook about how Sri Lankans are being innovative. Now, fast forward 9 months after that, where do you see that robot? In your day-to-day life and activities, have you ever seen it anywhere? Have you interacted with it? So there comes a question, my friend. It's the same thing. We saw how a child had actually developed a wireless stethoscope, presented it to the president when he went to Kandy. Which hospitals are using it? How many doctors are using this? So as Channa very correctly said, the tools and technologies are there, but having the tools and technologies won't necessarily make the country adopt a digital economy. Instead, It's about how well it's implemented, how strongly the policy directions are coming, encouraging people to adopt it, encouraging businesses to adopt it. These are the real questions we need to ask. So coming back to my earlier definition, to what extent are digital technologies being integrated into our day-to-day economic activities and services in order to make life convenient for the Sri Lankans? If the answer is it's happening in a very high rate, then we can say digital economy is becoming a reality. But if digital economy is getting restricted to discussions like this, if it's getting restricted to a few newspaper articles, and then we go back to our previous ways of working on a paper-based way and those very, I would say, traditional and bureaucratic ways of working, then I would say that we are living in a myth of having a digital economy. And it's surprising, as Channa very correctly said, COVID has definitely pushed all of us to adopt digital technologies. And in fact, we being faculty members of PIM under the guidance of our director, who is a moderator today, Professor Ajantha, he's a strong believer of having what we call as acronyms. So going by his leadership and guidance, I have an acronym I use for COVID when I teach this to my MBA students at PIM. COVID, COVID, in my view, is basically, it stands for Chief of Visioning in Digital. Chief of Visioning in Digital, because COVID has really made and pushed people to adopt digital technologies, companies to adopt digital technologies. But here comes the dilemma. We are a country where more than 50% of our people are actually, more than 50% of our economy will actually be, right, more than 50% of our economy will actually be provided, the economic activities are by the small and medium enterprises. But still, a large part of the economic activities do happen from the large organizations. We see them talking about digital, but the question is, how well have they adopted digital technology? Now, a few hours back, I know that one of the companies that I'm attached to, the general manager had to go on a 1-hour journey just to print and hand over certain invoices. Now, when they have been asked, can we email it? They have said, very sorry, company policy says they need the documents on hard copy. If not, they are not going to release the payment. And the finance is not working. So when they have asked, okay, can we hand it over and collect the check then? They have said, no, finance is working on only certain days of the week. You go and hand it over to the security and come back. I respect different companies having different policies, but in a setup like that, where some large companies are forcing people to come and deliver invoices in a printed format, what do you think? Will digital economy actually be a reality or a myth? I would say it would be a myth. But we also saw how the ice cream delivery guy or the chicken lorry guy giving his WhatsApp number and saying, sir, I won't be coming every day during the lockdown, but message me when you need something. I'll couple it with the rest of the area and I will come and do the deliveries for you. Now, what do you think that's pushing the economy towards? Definitely a digital economy. So this is the balance we have to strike. This is the two extremes between the pendulum of a Sri Lankan digital economy is actually swinging. And as we go on in this discussion, we will see how and what we need to do in terms of policies to make sure that the pendulum swings more towards making the digital economy a reality. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Taridu. Thank you, Channa. I really enjoyed your initial thought sharing, and I like particularly the new interpretation of COVID chief of visioning in digital, or I would say concepts of visioning in digital, or concrete actions of visioning in digital. That's interesting. I mean, having looked at the prospects, there are some challenges, problems. So that's where it should not be viewed as a panacea for all illnesses. There are some limitations, there are some challenges, there are some barriers. So may I raise the second question to Channa and Tarindu both? What are the unresolved issues in Sri Lankan context, even as much as we envisage to be a digital economy, even if it is very clearly mentioned in the vistas of prosperity and splendor, Saubhagya Dakma, even during the previous Japalan regime, they were talking about digitalization a lot. So basically still, even though we talk about it, there are some fundamental unresolved issues, some teething challenges. So Channa, I'm sure you are very familiar with this because you deal with them on a daily basis. So can you share some light on that, some challenges, unresolved issues with regard to Sri Lankan context?
Professor, I think I'll get into that in a second. Before that, I want to sort of address the potential that is there, because we talk about whether it's a reality or myth. Sure. But if I talk a bit on data, what is out there, this is data from actually January 2020.
Right.
We have roughly about 21.4 million of population, and out of that, we have almost 149% mobile penetration, which is 31. We have 31.8 mobile connections issued in the country. So which is almost 150% of the population, which means one person has more than one, whether it's a mobile or a SIM, right?
So basically, out of that, we have almost two people have 3 phones.
Yeah. So in addition, we have almost a 47% internet penetration, which is more than 10 million. But majority of those are using actually smartphones, and we have almost 30% or 6.4 million active social media users, primarily using mobile devices. So from an opportunity perspective or moving towards digital, we have, I think, a very positive framework in terms of digital adoption. But I would like to say these numbers are a bit misleading, because if you look at the first item of the population of 21.3 million, out of that only 18% are urban, right? And 82%, or let's say 80%, are rural. And majority of these 6.4 million social media users are linked to sort of either Western province or urbanized. So unless we actually move into rural areas, the adoption of economy from a majority perspective will not take place, because what is 18% versus 82% from a rural perspective. So in that sense, Professor, I think one of the challenges that we anticipate is if we are to go, for example, if you compare a similar country like Thailand, actually their mobile penetration is lower than Sri Lanka, which is something about 130%, right? But the digital penetration is more than 50%, right? Almost, I think, 60%. One of the issues there is their population, 50% is urban. So that is actually a major difference between Thailand and Sri Lanka, even though from a adoption perspective, from a digital mobile penetration, we are ahead. Our problem traditionally has been we have a larger rural population and a larger SME population, right? So in order to overcome some of them, one of the challenges that certainly we are going to face, because this actually statistic, we get from the usage of ATMs in the country, right? We have seen the ATM usage, which is also a technology, usage of, either withdrawing cash or checking your balance or doing a transaction. Almost 65% of these transactions are done in a local language, either Tamil or English, Sinhala, right? So what it means is unless the technology is enabled in, trilingual or all 3 languages, reaching the larger majority of the rural population is going to be a difficult task. The second aspect is also the reluctance of some other, especially if you look at the SME sector, to join. So there are a couple of reasons why that is so. Because if we are talking about a digital economy, one of the aspects that we are talking about digital economy is moving away from a manual system to electronic system, right? So one aspect of that is if you take a sort of a digital transaction, moving away actually from using physical cash, right? So all this time, actually, one of the challenges, even though, say for example, we got together and we linked all the ATMs together. So now a customer can go to any bank's ATM and withdraw cash. So thanks to that, actually people did not have a problem of having access to cash. Because when they go out of the house, either there's an ATM or a bank branch, so they can actually easily have access to cash. So because of that, people did not really have a problem of using cash, right? So even though we say, better to move digital, all that, but people didn't see a huge, I mean, obviously there were issues of not having change and other areas, but that was not really a showstopper for people to move, right? So if you have to move digital, certainly we need to move people away from the manual processes such as cash into electronic transactions. Now, there are also, we had so many obstacles. Now, for example, if we are to move, you might go to a supermarket or a larger retail shop. They might have all the digital channels, whether it's a point of sale terminals or sometimes the mobile payments may be enabled. However, when you go a bit beyond that into a smaller segment, the larger section of the SMEs to the smaller SMEs, the usage of technology in those has been very minimal. So and because of that, and also the reluctance of some of these guys to come on board. So one of the challenges there in terms of a digital economy, in terms of moving them away from cash, right? Because they deal in cash, day in and day out, deal in cash, right? And in order to move them out, all this time, we had almost 2 decades of card usage. But however, in order to use a card, all these SMEs needed to have a point of sale terminal, which costs somewhere around 45,000 to 50,000 rupees. And when you look at majority of them, we have out of hundreds of thousands of SME businesses, I mean, small retail shops to all these eateries and all these, right? We have only 80,000 point of sale terminals across the country. And out of those, supermarkets have probably, each supermarket has, 25 to 30 in one supermarket. And when you take the larger segment of the supermarkets out, most of the SMEs do not have a terminal. So the cards, so when you look at actually the usage of cards, we have, as a country, we have issued 23 million plus debit cards into the market, out of a 21.3 million population. And we have almost 1.8 credit cards issued into the market. But however, there are only 80,000 point of sales terminals. But in addition, even if you take 80,000 as a sufficient number, even though it's not, we just look at, so there is a document called Payments Bulletin, which is put out by Central Bank, which has all the financial data, which is a public document. We find that if you just average it out, the number of card-based transaction on a POS terminal a day is less than 4. So less than 4 transactions a day is happening across all these terminals. So which means there is no ROI for having a terminal for smaller guys, right? So why should they spend 45,000 rupees and get a terminal? So when there's no terminal, nobody can use a card. So it's a sort of a catch-22 situation, right? So we have to find solutions to overcome some of these issues. So we will talk about some of those solutions. So that was one of the biggest challenges. The second challenge is also actually two challenges. Actually, one challenge is the merchants not wanting to accept electronic payments, especially if you take the card payments, right? Because the banks used to charge 3 to 3.5% what we call a merchant commission. We call a merchant discount rate. So even if for a supermarket, this is not a deal breaker because they sell in large, sort of the value of the transactions which be larger. But for a small guy who's selling bread or vegetables, right? Taking 3% out of a transaction is a deal breaker because probably the profit that he or she makes out of that transaction. So they didn't want to accept card payments and part with 3% of profit. So they would say, I don't want card payments. Do you have cash? Right? So that itself was a deal breaker. So we had to again find a solution to overcome this, moving forward. The other segment is also, now we are talking about consumers wanting to use electronic or digital transactions, right? But when you go to, let's take a simple transaction. I mean, let's take a three-wheeler guy, right? I mean, that's again is technically a merchant, right? But we want to pay through a mobile or a card or something to the three-wheeler guy. But the three-wheeler guy, when he wants to buy vegetables or put petrol into his three-wheeler, he needs to go to an ATM and withdraw cash because the seller at the Sunday fair, that lady doesn't accept card payments or any electronic payments. So then and there, the cycle of transaction breaks. So unless we get these small, what we call the micro merchants, or actually those guys are individuals, into the ecosystem, the whole chain breaks. So that's why when we find, we have Uber and Pick Me and all these, ride-sharing applications, and most of the three-wheeler guys say, I don't want card payments. Unless you pay me cash, I cancel the ride, because obviously they need cash to complete their transaction, for their daily living. So there is a transaction breaker in that. Final piece, Professor, I would like to say one other challenge is also why some of these, especially the SMB sector, did not come on board is obviously fear of taxes, right? That's why, as we know, informally they maintain two books, one for the tax guy, one for their internal use. But I think there are actually solutions, such as I think the tax bracket has been increased, as of I think last year, where I think the minimal back bracket to you qualify for taxation is about 250,000 rupees a month, which is 3 million a year. So majority of the smaller guys don't even qualify for tax bracket. So their fear of taxes is unfounded, which is not really justifiable. But I don't think they are aware that that they need to come into this ecosystem. I think Tarundu touched on about during COVID, some of the smaller guys wanting to use WhatsApp, which is progressive. But I think that we need to create more awareness. So there's a lack of awareness in that. And also, I think having access to credit has been a traditional problem for most of these businesses in the country, right? I'm not talking about the high end of the businesses, but in the medium to low end, because obviously when they deal in cash, they never create this credit history with the bank, right? Either individually or as a small organization. So banks don't know their income. So they will never qualify for any segment of credit. So which has been a huge social issue, because most of these guys have no choice but to go to loan sharks and get interest, 10% interest a day type of loans, and they have to sell their assets to settle that. But I think if we are able to move these people into digital, then they will over a 6 months period start building a credit history and suddenly start becoming credit worthy. And then, the business can be sustained through a credit, stream of credit line through the financial institute. So these are these have been traditional challenges. So I think we have solutions through digital. So we can sort of discuss how some of these will come into place through digital. Over to you, Professor.
Excellent, Channa. I think I envy your savviness for numbers. So you spoke through numbers, the reality, and you mentioned several fundamental unresolved issues. I think if I'm to summarize, you should start with the mindset. Are we having the real conducive mindset, supportive mindset, the mindset geared to embrace digitalization? Sometimes you might have to go through kind of a discomfort to move beyond what you had been typically, traditionally doing. So that is the challenge that we see. In fact, I can share with you one of my personal experiences. I used to travel to Negombo at least twice a week. So I used the Katunayaka Colombo Expressway. And then I got interested in this ETC. And then, this is nothing new. So you put the sticker onto your car, and then you put a particular amount, say 5,000 rupees in your bank account, and then you give the orders to the bank to replenish that particular amount. So when you pass the ETC, you get the digital display, your remaining balance is say 450. So immediately when it gets below 600 rupees, it gets automatically replenished, and then you don't have to touch money at all. So my fundamental point is that when I use that ETC lane, I see only 2 to 3 cars, whereas a huge queue in the other MTC lanes, where they have not been able to embrace this, or they have not been able to sell this. I don't know, somewhere still the barrier is there. Somewhere still the inhibition is there. So I would like to see the day where people use more ETC lane than the other lanes. Then they can save the human power, they can save the labor. So this is where something where we need to look at some fundamental inertia, fundamental blocks, so that people are not willing to, as you said, to go for cashless transactions. So say, to have this sort of non-traditional methods. So we need to do some work on awareness building, as you very rightly said, and also uh, some kind of an helping hand for them to cross over the discomfort zone. So then they will enjoy the richness of digitalization in their daily lives. So let's talk about it further. So let me now come back to Tarindu. Tarindu, any insights about the fundamental unresolved issues that Channa very clearly mentioned? Any further elaborations on those and the barriers that we need to overcome? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Channa. I too really envy your savviness for numbers and how you are able to recall the numbers with so much accuracy and really bring it out in these discussions. Professor, answering your question on some of the fundamental issues, the way I see it, I would like to categorize it as some of the natural factors that will correct by itself, and also some of the factors that need to be corrected with proper intervention from the decision makers. If you look at the natural factors, I believe we are at a time period where we are actually in a transition. We see a lot of organizations really having some of the senior leaders are more like they would maybe belong to generation X, like the baby boomers, or maybe they would belong to generation Y. Whereas if you look at the people who are really being savvy with technology would be the millennials or the generation Z. Now, most of the time when you do a bit of tracing into a company that says that they don't want to work with digital invoices, they want printed paper, the CFO is probably a very senior person who was from the I would say the pre-IT era. Forget digital, pre-IT era. Whereas this is expected to change if you look at by in and now, or this is the time period where millennials are turning 23, 24 worldwide. They are finishing their degrees and the basic tertiary education, and they are entering the workforce. Now, in another 6 or 7 years' time, they will be definitely by 2030. Those who are born in 1995 and beyond will be the people who are earning the most amount of salaries worldwide. This is the latest McKinsey report, which I'm quoting you on. Now, as this happens, and as they take over the workforce, they will be more and more inclined towards using digital technologies. So this is where you will see digital invoices, digital signatures being accepted. So that's a automatic correction, because right now we are in a transitioning of a corporate leadership from, I would say, the more previous generations into the more newer and modern generations. Now that's the automatic correction. The areas where we need with human intervention. Let's start with public sector services. Professor and Channa, I really hope you have not had the negative experience of losing a laptop, because I know the trouble of it, because I experienced that back in 2011. I went to the R. Premadasa Stadium to watch a practice match between Sri Lanka and West Indies, and my driver called me and said, sir, when I went to have dinner, I parked the car outside a particular night shop and went to have dinner. Now I came back, but your laptop is gone. Somebody has taken your laptop. More than the agony of losing the laptop, it was the agony of going to the police station, trying to explain to them what happened. And later on, actually, it was a new laptop. I had not set up the what I call the password and all yet. So whoever took it has tried to open it, and because of that, automatically it has got logged on to Skype. It has got logged on to Skype. So some student of mine had seen me on Skype and chatted with me, but then that person has quickly shut it off, whoever took it. So this means we could technically track where the laptop would have been, just a matter of going through the internet service providers and tracking down that IP address. And Skype has a separate email address for this kind of communication. Explaining that to the police was a nightmare. And they kept on writing what I was saying, but that's it. And at one point, the lower level police ranked officer asked the senior person, sir, and to which the inspector replied, I don't understand, but that's okay. We'll anyway write it. He understands what he's saying. So this needs to change, Professor. I mean, our public service providers needs to be much more digitally enabled. We do see it happening in certain pockets here and there, but it has to have a wider level proper plan where we educate our public sector service providers more on this, number one. Number two, I would say in terms of the corrections that we need to do would be to raise a further awareness campaign and have a proper incentive scheme. For example, when a business adopts a particular digital technologies, the extent to which they have adopted digital technology maybe should qualify them for a bit of a tax benefit, or maybe it gives them a particular credit system for which they can use when they are obtaining certain other services, maybe from the government. We need a proper way to incentivize these people for adopting digital technologies. Also, some of the fundamental issues which I actually see, Professor, if you honestly ask me, sometimes, given that our public sector entities may not be fully geared with this required knowledge, I'm sometimes a little happy that we haven't fully gone digital, because if you look at 3 days ago, there in a city of Florida, one of the water treatment plants got hacked, and a hacker was trying to mix a high level of sodium with the water. Luckily, the person who was monitoring it realized that somebody was taking over the cursor of the screen and using it to change these details, quickly managed to put a stop to it, disconnected, and quickly change it back. My question is, if something like that happened in, let's say, Sri Lanka, how tech savvy would that particular utility provider be? Right? Then the blame will finally come to tech. So another intervention, like I said, is the knowledge. We need to train our people, both in the private sector and the public sector. We need to fundamentally give them the basic knowledge. What is this digital disruption? What benefits? How can they use it? And most importantly, what are the pitfalls? What you need to watch out for? Apart from that, we have the technology. We were the first country in the region to bring in 4G technology. In fact, at some of the leading mobile conferences of India, they raised the red flag and they said, look, Sri Lanka is being a threat to us. They might take over the regional telecommunication leadership at this rate. And so we have the technology. We definitely have talented and skilled people. And we do see a good policy direction and an interest from His Excellency the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa for implementing digital technology. But like I said, it's not a technology issue, it's a human issue we have. So we need the right policies to train, develop, and skill our people to really adopt digital practices in their enterprises, both in the public sector and the private sector.
Interesting, Tharindu. In fact,
over to you, Professor.
Yes, it reminds me of what we have often heard. The dinosaurs are not in the jungle, they are still in the corporate world. So the difficulty to change.
Absolutely.
And I see, Tharindu, this as an issue of paradoxes. As you rightly said, it is not just the attitude, but the aptitude as well. You have to go beyond attitude again, even though you are willing to change your aptitude, your knowledge, the required competency. There are huge people development challenges. So interesting. And again, you can refer to the Florida incident as a digital terrorism, or we talk about a new feature of the cyber terrorism. And again, if it happens in Sri Lanka, there will be a lot of people who would pass the buck to one another and trying to say, I'm not responsible for that. We are very good in shirking responsibilities in passing the buck. So that's a completely different discussion.
For sure.
Yes, for me, the paradox is, as Channa very correctly said, urban-rural divide, and then the income divide, and the famous adage that Kolombata Kiriya Pita Kakiri, where there were pathetic stories about some students in rural areas trying to find signals, in getting into mountains, in getting into treetops to find signals to get connected to their online session. So these are the challenging stories. Of course, the brighter side of it.
If I may just add something there, Professor. Now, for example, it also starts with proper measuring, because when you're trying to introduce digital concepts to an economy, you need proper measurement. For example, do we as a country know what percentage of our students are actually having access to online learning, and what percentage has access to quality online learning without like, we need to know these numbers. It all starts by realizing where we are, because we can't get to where we want to get to if we don't know where we are.
I think as far as I'm concerned, it's being monitored, it's being measured, but the appropriate actions based on the data needs to be done. So Channa, I'll turn to you. In the meantime, let me invite all our active, valuable participants, either through Zoom or through Facebook. Please share your questions. We have little time for you because we value your participation. So please don't hesitate to raise your questions to Channa and Tarindu both. And then I'm having the role of just passing the question to two of them because they are the experts. So till you come up with your question through either chat option or texting option, and then Tarindu will pick those questions. Till then, may I turn once again to Channa again, further reflections. I know it's such a deep and broad area. In fact, looking at all the associated challenges, any ray of hope. Now, let's not be doomsday advocates by being negative. I think there's some brighter side. I think Sri Lankans have the vibrancy of bouncing back. We have the resilience towards a revival. So what are some positive sparks, Channa?
Yeah, actually, Professor, I think as I said, we have been having the tools, for a long time. So it's actually a matter of people adopting them, right? Now I said, from communicating on electronic, sort of document sharing to any other means, you don't necessarily need a physical signature, because we have been having these digital signatures since 2009. And you can simply digitally sign a document which cannot be actually altered, right? And which is under the Electronic Transactions Act. So we have a good set of legal acts in place. The Electronic Transaction Act actually recognizes a digital signature. Now one of the examples I would say is during COVID, I think since March, we had to sort of stay in home for about 3 months, at least minimum, during curfew. And we had to do financial transactions. We had to send financial instructions to the banks to make payments. And all were done through digital signatures. We basically, with state banks, we just from home, we just digitally signed the payment instructions and send, and they accepted, because actually those are legally valid in a court of law in the country. So it's just that it's a matter of adopting. I mean, it's simply creating a file and converting it to a PDF and putting a signature. And also technologically, if you alter that document or the signature, the whole signature gets invalid. And the receiver can actually validate whether it's a valid signature or whether the document has been altered. So all these tools are in place. So I think from a communication perspective, that has been there. And some of the other areas that the challenges that so we need to actually really look at the context of the country, right? Now from a digital adoption perspective, if you look at the payments landscape, if you take place like Africa, one of the most popular mechanisms has been this technology called M-Pesa, right? Which is where you use a smartphone to do all the, what we call mobile money, and that was very popular because that was popular because of the context. Because in Africa, you don't find any banks, you don't find any branches, even to do a transaction. Even to go to the next ATM, probably you have to travel 50 miles or 50 kilometers, right? And because of that, people had no choice. Right, but so because of that, they moved into digital because of lack of choice. So I think the ray of hope came with COVID, when people couldn't move out of the house, they couldn't go to ATM, they couldn't go to a bank, so they had no choice but to either use their mobile or internet or some other facility to do all their transactions, get things delivered. So fortunately we had the delivery companies set up, right? The ride sharing companies to other delivery companies to deliver, and we had the tools enabled to get them delivered from an end-to-end fulfillment of a transaction, and also in terms of the other areas. Now, for example, I talked about the cost of a transaction, right? And why some of the merchants were reluctant to accept some of these transactions because of the high commission. Right now, we have tools like, initially you mentioned, we have actually introduced this card with central bank approval, which is basically partnership between Lanka Clear and Japanese Credit Bureau, JCB. It's a Lanka Pay JCB co-branded card. So one of the first things that we did was we brought the commission down to 1% of a card transaction. So it would be acceptable to a wider range of merchants rather than having to pay 3 to 3.5%. And when we introduce mobile payments, which is basically using any app, it's not necessarily your bank's own app. There are at least almost 20 apps out there where you can actually carry out a financial transaction, where the commission rate has come down to 1% or less. So that again, that is more acceptable to a merchant, whether it's a larger merchant or even a SME merchant. The other area that we touched upon was on the terminal, right? So we have, I said 80,000 plus terminals, but we have hundreds of thousands of retail shops, across the country. So something we introduced, what we call the QR code, which is what we call the quick response code. It's just a sticker on a wall or a table, right? Where basically it does the function of a terminal at zero cost to the merchant, right? And a bank will provide that sticker that basically has the biller's credentials, where anybody with a smartphone can just scan that and make a payment, because all the biller credentials that where you need to send that transfer the funds is in that QR code. So it securely transfers that information to the mobile device, and using the mobile device, you can actually make a real-time payment, and the confirmation comes to the customer via SMS saying his account was debited, and the confirmation to the merchant comes in form of a SMS to him or her in the form of a SMS. So these tools, Professor, over 2 decades, right? We have had 80,000 point of sales terminals, but over the last 3 months, we have been enabled to get 150,000 plus merchants on board QR. Because obviously, lower commission rate to lack of there's zero cost to merchants in terms of a terminal. In that. So other area that we are looking at is the ray of hope is most of the countries, the first usage, as you touched upon the ETC, in terms of the highways, but the transport segment, the buses and the railway, right? Most of the countries, the usage of electronic has started at the transport segment. In Sri Lanka, it's still cash-based, right? So something that we are introducing within the next 2 to 3 months, probably within the next couple of months, is this card that we have introduced is going to be the national transport card, where you do a tap and go, because all the Sri Lanka, all the buses that belong to the SLTB has what we call the ticket machine. Actually, that ticket machine is a point of sale terminal, which has the tap and go capability. Right now, they are just using it as a ticket machine, right? So once this card is start issuing by the banks very soon, that will be used as the transport card that can be used on all SLTB buses and private buses and the government railway. So once people start using this card on transport, the natural extension is using that on a terminal or using a QR code in a business, right? And the other area is from a business perspective. We see obviously they have cost pressures, they have economic pressures due to COVID, right? So they want to cut down costs, and so many other. Recently, I read an article where Sri Lanka is spending millions, if not billions, of rupees in importing paper, right? So when you have digital signatures, and which is very efficient way of doing communication, communicating via documents, right? One easy way of cutting down costs, in addition to making efficient, is to use some of these tools, right? So when you use these tools, things become efficient as well as also drastically reduces costs. And also, for example, if you take, say, government sector tenders, one of the accusations, especially in the corruption side, one of the accusations is people are changing tender documents to, all those. So if you digitally sign these tender documents, even if somebody changes that, obviously that signatures and the document becomes invalid. So it actually provides those tools to provide that in order to get rid of some of these perils of manual processes. It will provide those areas. So I think we certainly have the tools and the capability. I think the COVID has given a big push for consumers to adopt. I think the business adoption also has taken place, but very correctly, Tarindu said there are certainly still laggards in trying to adopt digital. But I think from the younger generation, so we see from a CEO perspective, I would say 45 years to higher is the age range, right? But we see the management to most likely the senior management, younger generation who are really pushing this. So I think hopefully with this push, the organizations will move. Since we have all the technologies and the tools in place, it's just a matter of people moving.
Thank you, Channa. I wish if we had more time to explore further, but as you rightly said, there are promising prospects. And then the transportation sector could be a very good way of catalytically implementing. And again, don't forget about the archaic legal system. And there are plenty of other areas where we need to revive and sometimes resurrect. And then there are digitalization challenges, but I think it's good to go step by step, steadily. And Tarindu, there's a question I think you can address.
Correct, sir. I thought I will
yes,
share this question. Yes. So I think we were one of our very valuable learning partners from one of our overseas MBA programs. Mr. Bandula Rajpaksa has joined us. And nice to have you, Bandula. And I see a question. Digital economy, so a couple of things. Number one, needs backing from legal reforms, building trust among public, and to lift up cultural barriers in the rural areas. How and how soon Sri Lanka can get these barriers lifted? I think we address this to a certain extent. I think what we really need is a proper communication plan on how we get it to the minds of the customers, the minds of the public about the benefit of adopting digital. And this is a bit of internal communication that has to be done, maybe at the level of public sector entities. It should be a matter of pride, like how, for example, how we have been the first country to, one of the first countries in the region to get rid of malaria, one of the first countries, to get rid of so many other diseases like that. Why can't we be the, let's say, the fastest in digital adoption in South Asia? Now, coming to a level like that, we'll need private sector, public sector, everyone to really work together. And if we can do that, if we can have that proper communication, I think the adoption will happen in a much more faster way. In terms of the cultural barrier, I always believe it's a matter of that one strategic player who can do what is expected, do what is right, and to get the heads rolling and the heads turning and the eyes rolling. For example, Professor, if you look at India, India was also a country with a very low level of adoption of digital payments, but Channa would agree, Paytm came and did a huge revolution, and today somewhere close to about 20 to 25% of the economy is running on digital transactions. And if you look at Paytm's strategy, they were driven not towards only the urban areas, but they were more focused on the rural areas, the farmers. They showed how farmers can be a part of it, pensioners, how pension holders can actually be using this technology to get their due payments. I mean, these are some of the things which could easily be looked into and carried out. But there has to be number one, we need a few catalysts, and I believe now, like how PICME has been a catalyst in the digital transportation sector as a digital disruptor in Sri Lanka. But we all know PICME is limited to a few cities, like, for example, Colombo, Kandy, Galle. And even there, if you ask them, you can talk to the PICME drivers, how when they go to some cities, the three-wheel guys, come and try to throw stones at their windscreens and all that. So we need proper policies to address this, to get the mindset out, to show that digital is not an enemy, but more of an enabler. All right. So this will all happen with the right communication. So maybe the government also needs to come up with a proper communication plan. Like if you look at the central bank, I believe with the input from experts like Channa, the Cash Vade campaign, where everywhere you go, you see these campaigns on digital, on ATMs, in the banks about how to get rid of this cash vade. So like that, there are so many other vades or other problems which we can overcome with digital solutions, but we need a proper integrated long-term communication plan, at least a 2 to 3 year spanning communication plan. And at the end of it, we should have been able to get at least 60 or 50 to 60% of our population, especially from the rural areas, towards adopting. Then maybe we don't have to get farmers to be able to use a smartphone with and a mobile app, but at least make them comfortable with SMS banking. So we need proper clear milestones and targets to get majority of our country really on board with digital communication. Digital economic activities. There is
Thank you,
also
Thanju. I think we are running out of time. And
correct. Sir,
can
before we
I?
wind up, there is one more question for Channa, I think.
Yes.
The current
So
state, I think Channa,
we
you
will
get
take
a
it
lot.
as I promised. We need to finish within 1 hour. Let's take it as a final question. Thank you
Yes,
very much for your encouraging response, Channa. You can give a brief answer.
Yes, Channa, what is the current state of PayPal availability in Sri Lanka? That's the question.
Yeah, so actually it's a question that I get everywhere. So PayPal availability is for PayPal, you can make a payment from Sri Lanka to any outside entity. But if you are a business in Sri Lanka, outsiders cannot make payments using PayPal because PayPal has not enabled it. So there were a lot of allegations from different parties that there's regulatory issues. There is no absolute regulatory issue. It's just the fact that PayPal is not interested in coming and setting up operations in the country. So that is the main problem, because obviously they have not seen a ROI because we are a small economy as opposed to India or China or large economies. Because for them, they have a absolute return policy. For that, they have to set up operations in country. So for that, in order for them to set up, that's a US company and there's OFAC regulations and there's a lot of documentation, which is a huge investment. So they have not seen a ROI. And also nobody from the country is lifting their hands and saying, we will guarantee you 10 million transactions if you come and set up. So because of that, actually, that's the bottleneck. Professor, before I forget, just two things I want to highlight.
Sure.
In terms of the economic benefit, I think that is a real valuable piece, right, in this whole ecosystem. One aspect of economic benefit is why we need to move away from cash is actually the cost of cash in circulation. We have almost 600 billion cash in circulation, and it costs roughly about 1.5% of the GDP to maintain cash in the economy. If you compare that to 3% of GDP is only spent on entire education, and we are wasting 1.5% to maintain cash. So if we move 30% of the population into electronic, we are going to save 0.5% GDP, which can use for social benefits, right? The other side is in terms of foreign exchange loss, right? Because we have been involved in most of the international card transactions where we are losing more than 10 billion rupees a month, 10 billion rupees in foreign exchange for all domestic transactions, right? And due to COVID, we have lost most of the foreign exchange that are coming into the country. And unless we stop the leakage, whatever that comes in going out, where there is enough local instruments available to facilitate almost 99% of the transactions that are happening are local, not foreign, right? So those we have enabled channels. Unless we use local channels, we are going to continue to lose foreign exchange. So that's also one of the reasons for Sri Lanka, for the policymakers to look at this, to save foreign exchange, which are hard earned, and to look at some of these channels that is introduced.
That's a very, very valid point and a very pertinent way to conclude. And I think we need the right will from all leadership fronts and the right set of skills. So the will, skill, and then we can climb the hill of ensuring that we have proper digitalized economy, digital economy for the socio-economic upliftment of our mother nation. So as a nation's management mentor, we are very happy that we have this monthly montage featuring experts in diverse fields. And let me wholeheartedly thank Mr. Channa De Silva being one of our prestigious products, and Mr. Tharindu Amarsekara, who is the initiator of monthly montage and also a vibrant resource person of PIM. And let me thank all the participants through Zoom or through Facebook. And then the recording will be available very soon for you to refer, for you to reflect, and for you to relate and to refresh yourselves. And then the main aim is let's be positive, even though we should not be positive with regard to COVID-19. Let's be positive in our mindset, and let's look at promising prosperous future with digitalization in bridging the rural urban divide, and also to have the bridging of the generational gaps, and to have the right willingness to change, embrace change for better, and then to use digitalization for the betterment of all of us. With that positive thought, let me conclude today's monthly montage. And once again, my thank goes to all who got contributed, and also all who supported, including Prabhash and our IT setup at PIM and the entire PIM community for your encouraging response for this concept to be a concrete application. Good luck, all the very best. Stay safe, and then let's make digitalization work. All the very best.